In this lesson, we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem to find the missing side. The theorem states that if A and B are the lengths of the legs of a right triangle, and C is the length of the hypotenuse, and the hypotenuse is always the longest, the diagonal side of the triangle, then A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Pretty easy formula to remember. So here we have a problem, and we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem to find the height of the airplane above the ground. Now, you can use the Pythagorean theorem only when you have a right triangle. And when you see the little box here, that is an indication that represents that this is a 90-degree right triangle. So we can proceed with using the Pythagorean theorem to find the missing side. The Pythagorean theorem states that if you know at least two sides of a right triangle, you can find the missing side by using the A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Now, in terms of the legs of the triangle, it doesn't matter which you use. You know that the long diagonal side is the hypotenuse, so therefore the other two sides of the triangle are considered to be their legs. Now, I like to use B for the bottom. I like to use the bottom and call it B because you can easily remember it because it's at the bottom. So then I will call the height A there. But it doesn't matter which side you let A or B, technically, it's still the same. But what has to happen is C has to be the hypotenuse. You can't change up C with anything else. C has to be that longest side. So let's go ahead and plug in what we know. We know side B and we know side C. So let's go ahead and plug those into the formula, and then what we need to solve for then is side A. We don't know what A is. So plugging them in, 12 squared is 12 times 12, which is 144. 15 squared is 15 times 15, which is 225. Our next step to solving for A, we need to get A all by itself. Right now, 144 is on the side with A, so let's go ahead and subtract 144 from each side. Last step to solving this for A is to take the square root of both sides, use that square root property. Because we want to solve for A, and you have A squared. The only way you can get A by itself is to take the square root. And whatever you do to one side, you must also do to the other. And so we know the square root of 81 is 9, so A equals 9. So the height of the airplane is about 9 kilometers. And so we've just solved a problem using the Pythagorean theorem, again, which states if you know any two sides of a right triangle, you can always find the other side by simply using the Pythagorean theorem. In this example, we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem to find the length of the missing side. So on this triangle, right triangle, notice that we know A. We know C, but this time we don't know B. We don't know the side there at the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and plug into the formula the sides that we know so that we can solve for B. So 4 squared, 4 times 4 is 16. 7 squared, 7 times 7 is 49. Next, in order to solve for B, we need to get rid of that 16. So to do that, we have to do the opposite, which is subtract 16 from each side. Last step to solving for B is to take the square root of both sides. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. And B equals radical 33. That is a non-perfect root. It does not have a perfect inside of it. So at that point you are done. Remember, you can also write your answer as a decimal by simply entering the square root of 33 into your calculator. And what you should get is approximate decimal of 5.7. And since we're talking about centimeters in this particular example, that missing side is 5.7 centimeters. So make sure you know how to write it in both forms, either the simplified radical form or the decimal form. Either form is acceptable. Let's use the Pythagorean theorem to find the missing side of this right triangle. So as you can see, we know A, we know B, but we don't know C. So we don't know what the hypotenuse is. Let's go ahead and plug in the values of A and B so that we can solve for C. So 6 squared equals 36. 3 squared is 9. Add those two numbers together on the left side. Last step to solving for C is to take the square root of both sides. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. 45 is not perfect, but it does have a perfect inside of it. It has a perfect square of 9 inside, so you're going to have to solve it. Once you simplify, you're left with an answer of 3 radical 5. Or you can simply type square root of 45 into your calculator and present your answer in decimal form, which is approximately 6.7. Since we're talking about feet here, the missing side is approximately 6.7 feet. Example, 2 cars leave the same point at the same time. So in other words, the 2 cars left the point here of where the right triangle is, where the box there is. They left there at the same time. One was traveling north and the other was traveling east. So after an hour, one car has traveled 48 miles and the other had traveled 64 miles. So how many miles apart are they at that time? So we want to know the distance here between them, which is your hypotenuse side. So again, we don't know C. We know A, we know B, but we don't know C. So let's go ahead and plug in those values so we can solve for C. So go ahead and get your calculators out and type in 48 times 48 and then 64 times 64. So you're going to get really large numbers there for these. Next, go ahead and add those large numbers together. Last step to solving this is to take the square root of both sides. And how far apart are they? Once we take the square root of each side, did you say 80? If you did, then you are correct. Okay, so they are 80 miles apart from each other. And there you have it, the Pythagorean theorem.